Audio codec done. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Yeah. There, sorry. I apparently needed to change one setting, which I don't understand how it changes every single time I do one of these, but whatever. We're just going to roll with it. We'll let some people trickle in here. Let me go over here. How is everyone doing today? Going over here. Got a cool new background. Got that. You can see my team's homepage. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. So just sort of as like a basic introduction of what the thing that you are watching at this present time. One of the things that we've started doing as a team at the Wikimedia Foundation is originally weekly, but I think I'm going to change it to bi-weekly, or I have changed it to bi-weekly, live streamed office hours where you could come and you can ask questions. You could even just sort of lurk and co-work and just watch it, watch us do it. It's not like a presentation. There's nothing prepared. I think the first one, I guess the first two was actually just me like working through different problems. I think I worked on data labeling for a little bit. And then the second, or I guess the one before that, we worked on model cards. In the future, we'll do more things of like, we'll train some models, or at least work on training some models. I give no guarantees of like fully training a model within 1 hour block. We'll talk about infrastructure. The goal is just to, have a large amount of transparency into what the team's working on and where our headspace is at. And to do that in a format that is more casual, to do that in a format that is more ingestible to folks, where you don't have to sit down and listen to a PowerPoint slide from me for 45 minutes to understand. And frankly, what I would like for people to take from this is that we are a team who is working through, working on some interesting stuff and working on some interesting projects, and us like actually working through that, right? Like you can see us go through and try to figure some stuff out, try to figure out some kind of issue. You could see us working on model cards. And if you want to come and like help us out and get involved, like here's the sort of 3 places you could do it. Like we have a IRC chat that you can come and join, which we are all in and we sit in all day. We actually have like a talk page, which is like sort of a live blog, which you can come and ask questions. You can come in and reply comments. I post like a weekly update every single week, as to like just any kind of updates of what the team is doing. And then we also have our Fabricator board. So this is like our Jira board, which is totally public. So you can come in and you can make comments and do whatever you want and say our ticket's dumb and that kind of stuff. So that's sort of like, my goal is that you can actually see what the team is doing. It doesn't look like there's no black box of team. There's no like nerd sitting in a corner, like making AI. There's actually a bunch of real people working on real projects, which is where we strive for with, trying to be a transparent organization. What I was thinking of doing this hour is, talking about the things that I've learned working at the foundation for a year. So I've worked at the foundation for a year and a day, and I was not a Wikipedia community member coming in, right? So like I made a Wikipedia page ages ago, like way ages ago, but I'm not like an active community member. And so joining the foundation, learning how things work, sort of coming in with like an outside perspective, I think it would be hopefully interesting to folks where they could see, sort of if they're coming in with also an outside perspective, sort of see what the foundation does and see the things that I thought were really interesting. And also, if anybody has any questions in the chat around, like what's it like to work at the foundation and that kind of stuff, I'm happy to answer those too. And, if there's any topic that people want to discuss, definitely we could talk about that. But really my goal is just to sort of go through and highlight some of the things that I thought were really interesting in this past year. Let me go see here. So I think, probably like I say like definitely just to start off with, the one that is like the most interesting to me, which has been like both incredible, um, and sometimes like just really insane, is the fact that Wikimedia hosts Wikipedias, like a bunch of them, and we do that on our own infrastructure. So there is no AWS, there is no Google Cloud, something like that. We are doing it on our own servers, in our own server racks. And what's interesting that I just will never get over, and I did not appreciate at the time, is like how absolutely transparent the foundation is around this kind of stuff. So if you do, let me go see here. If you look at something like, sorry, I keep on saying Wikipedia instead of Wikipedia. So if you look at something like this, this is like the actual stack, the actual server stack that runs Wikipedia. These are real servers, right? And it is very real as a member of the team, and this is the first time this has happened to me, where like I actually have a budget for each of these. I mean, not all these aren't mine. This is just some stock photo from the warehouse, but I order these servers and we spec them out, right? Like a double wide chassis with this CPU and this kind of stuff, with a 1G card, placed in this kind of rack and stuff like that. Like my team makes those orders for stuff. And then they're actually, a staff member will literally go to the server room and like plug them in. Like that's how it actually works, which is so interesting. There's no like virtual stuff in what we work on, which is cool. And at the same time, whew, man, like I so appreciate the flexibility that provides, and also appreciate how like we do it for like a large number of reasons around cost, around our philosophy of how open tech should work, our really strong belief in open source, and we want to like highlight those technologies and that kind of stuff. And that takes a lot of work. Like that takes a lot of members who like, we have a data center team. Like we're not just a software team. We're like also a hardware team, also a release team. And if you want to do something like, for example, us are deploying a new MLOps system, like the first thing you got to do is buy servers to support that. Like that's like step one of the process, which is like a really interesting and sort of like different for me. That's not something that like I've done in the past, but it's been fun. It's definitely been fun. I will say it was terrifying on the first day. I think like 1 or 2 days in, someone from the hardware team messaged me and was like, "Hey, do you still want the memory upgrade that you purchased?" And I was like, "I don't know what that means. Like, what memory?" And it was like literally it was like sticks of RAM that they were gonna put into the machines, and I don't think I was ready for that, and it took me a while to sort of get past that. But now it's been great, and I've been enjoying it more and more, sort of as I understand it more. Question in chat: could you please talk about what techniques ORS uses these days for vandalism detection? What kind of features it uses? Sure. Yeah. So one of the biggest set of models that we host are typically called the ORS models. Technically, ORS is the infrastructure the models are deployed on, but we do a certain set of models. One of them that like will do things that, for example, actually I can even show you a real world example. These ORS models were sort of like one of the most early things that were done at the team, and they're still highly used today. If we go over, so this is the recent changes page for English Wikipedia, right? And so just so everyone sees, this is, I'll make it bigger for folks, sorry. This is English Wikipedia. You go to recent changes. These are all the recent changes that happened. You can see right here, these are like edits that would be flagged by ORS. So it says like if there's an R by it, it's sort of flagged by ORS. And you can go through and filter some kind of stuff. And one of those ones is sort of like is made by ORS, which is like a certain set of article, like an edit quality that we do. The thing about the ORS models is that, wherever possible, we have been doing, and this is actually, I think probably Aaron Hafecker, who's one of the like members of the team early on, and Amir really highlighted this interesting approach of using, if you're going to say make a model for edit quality for French Wikipedia, ideally you should be gathering data from French Wikipedia to use. And so in something like this where we're talking about like edit quality, they would have folks from French Wikipedia like gather training data that would be used and then train a model off that and then serve it back to French Wikipedia, like that kind of notion. And I have really grown to think that is like probably should be like the gold standard for doing this kind of stuff, and it's super hard to do in practice. But the idea that a community would be the source of the training data for the model that you would serve back to them, but then trying to do that at scale with like hundreds of different communities is both really hard, but also makes me really appreciate that approach to sort of minimize bias that you would have, right? So you're not training everything on English Wikipedia and then you're, applying it to, like Swahili Wikipedia, right? You'd be your gold standard you'd be going for is like actually taking the data from Swahili Wikipedia and then moving it on to like training a model on that and moving on. That part of it has been really interesting. And, one of the things that we have been working on is like, okay, what do we do with sort of the next iteration of these like article quality models and that kind of stuff? And so right now the team is working on two things along those lines. The first is migrating those models to the new infrastructure that we're building, just like package them up and move them over, which I just spent a long call about the details of that. And the other part is actually having some folks come in and take a fresh look at how we want to work with these models and what we want to do with them in the future. So, for example, I'll give you two examples. One, we have a Google Summer of Code fellow who just got started, and we were talking about what they should be working on and like what would be interesting. And my ask was, hey, come in and take a fresh set of eyes on some of the ORS models and just see if you can try a different approach, right? Like just come in with a different perspective than ours and just see what comes of it. Maybe you end up using certain NLP techniques that we don't have. Maybe you could make something that is, say, less, that is more language agnostic, and we could have sort of like a 2 tiers of models. So like we have the gold standard model where we gather training data from that community and serve it back to them. And then we have a second tier, which is less performant of a model, but has broader coverage. So we could actually deploy, say, like a single model that provides like a decent, say, article quality prediction for articles like across many, many communities. And then, like have a mixed match of both. So you both have that spread, but in certain Wikipedias, you have like a really strong technique. I am super interested the way that, we have like a data science celebrity here, Nick Wan, host of Sliced on Twitch. I'm interested to see how that approach works, because it would mean that we both have that nice broad scale. Like we could have, article quality predictions or edit quality predictions across a broad range of communities, but then also where we could, right? Like where we could actually use the training data from that community and gather it from the community. In the long term, what I would really, really like to end up doing is the work that sort of got started under the last management team called Jade. The idea is to have an extension to MediaWiki. So MediaWiki is the software that runs Wikipedia, like it's sort of the content management system of Wikipedia. Have an extension to that would allow folks like visitors or editors or something like that to like provide training data just in their natural like user experience on Wikipedia. So say you like click on an article, and maybe 1% of people who click on an article, they receive a little prompt or something like, I don't know, I'm not going to say where because I'm not a UX designer, but like somewhere that's like, hey, like what do you think of the quality of this article? Or do you think, or maybe they click on like, say like a particular, like they click on like a particular edit or something like that. And it says like, hey, is this a quality edit or not, or is this a is this a harmful edit or not, or is this vandalism or not, or something like that. And we use that to have that continual stream of training data. And that would mean that communities could be giving us regular training data, because one of the issues that we've had so far is that how we've done training data in the past is, go to the communities and ask them, hey, help us out, help create these training data. Here's like a list of all the edits. Can you like mark them as productive or not, or damaging or not? And then they sort of do this, like, they'll do this like big session of work where they like mark through like 10,000 cases. And then we use that training data to train the model. There's like issues of model drift, right? And so they put in all that like great work before. Then over time, like the training data becomes less and less relevant, because over time user behaviors change. And so how do we change that to make it work? I'll say my grand idea, which I love, and would require like a lot more work, and I have no idea if it's possible, but I'd definitely like to at least talk about it, is the idea that if you say you're on this particular page and there was a prompt here that said, hey, is this article damaging or not? Is this vandalism or not? And then you clicked on it, like you would get an edit. Like there would be a record that you participated in that, and you would sort of like get the cred that you had like participated and made that edit, and it's sort of like in your profile it would like say how many edits you did, like that kind of stuff. Just because it's nice to have that kind of recognition that you were helping out Wikipedia, which is a big deal. The problem is that like folks who have spent many hours of their personal, like their valuable personal time training data for us, that is like invisible in the the edit sort of system. I don't know if that's possible. That's way above my pay grade, but it's definitely something that I always thought would be interesting. So that was, like starting off, like that was one of like the infrastructure part. That was, it's weird coming in, and I think it's definitely, I've seen it as other people have come in too, where it's like, oh, okay, cool, we need to care about things at a much lower level because we're going to be working on our own infrastructure. But for a certain type of person, it's really fun because this is, you get to, you're not abstracting away a ton of stuff to AWS, right? Like you're the one who's like building it from scratch. It does mean that the foundation's sort of tech department has a ton of SREs because we're all doing all the infrastructure work. What's another thing? I think like definitely the one that's been really interesting for me is the importance of community. And I've worked at machine learning at a few places. I've worked at nonprofits and for-profits. I've worked at, like teeny little startups, and then startups that were really, going unicorn. And a lot of the times when you work in the commercial setting, or even like the smaller nonprofit setting, there isn't a community of people around your product, right? So like the last place I worked was a health insurance startup. And there was no community. There was no community. There was no, interest in having a community because, like, that's, I don't know how you'd have a community around a health insurance company. We did have communities when I worked at some Kenyan nonprofits and that kind of stuff. But, man, like, having a community is really, like, a superpower, and it's something that you have to, like, treat very, very, very carefully because people are giving you their, like, personal time for stuff, right? And people are, like, literally, like, I take my work day, I work on Wikipedia all day, and then I go, I have my personal time to do what I want. They're taking their personal time and like helping me out with my job, which has been so amazing. And like, I won't even make it abstract. Like there are people who have seen these live streams come into, our Fabricator ticket. I'll number one, like Theo of PA, who's someone who came in, like saw one of these live streams or maybe saw me tweeting about it, came in, and my team talks about his advice a lot. Like our SREs are like talking with them a lot around like what, like, because they have a lot of experience with like Kubeflow, and we're trying to install Kubeflow from the first time, and like actually having that's been like something that I've been learning, and hopefully I'm getting better at it, but like probably if you saw me engage with the community at the a year ago, I was different than how I'm doing it now, right? So for example, like just talking to you all, having that like live stream talk page or that like live blog and that kind of stuff, that part of it is like, that is the thing that we have that like Google or something doesn't have, right? Google has like money, right? So you can sort of buy your way out of problems with like hiring new staff, getting new servers, like that kind of stuff. At the foundation, though, it's that people are willing to donate their time. And so how do you use that in a way that is maximizing their value and their feeling of inclusion for it, right? Like how do you end up coming in and making it feel like you don't want to waste their time on stuff, right? Like you don't want to waste their donations, you don't want to waste their time, you don't want to waste their engagement, you don't want to waste their intention. Like how do you do that is something that I am learning, and something hopefully I'm getting better at. And starting this live stream was sort of a big part of it, of like, let me try to move our communication channels to like places where people are really, it's easy for people to engage. Hopefully it's still a learning process. I don't think anybody would consider me an expert here, but it's definitely something that's been a skill that I did not have so much before. Although we had a small community at Uchidi, but like it wasn't like the scale. Another question. Could you please discuss if the talk pages in Wikipedia are ever used in any internal machine learning models? Not that I know of. None of the models that my team makes uses the talk pages. I'm certain of that. That is not to say that other models that are created by, say, communities don't use that. So for example, I'm in charge of machine learning like at the foundation, like the models that we host. But different communities, like English Wikipedia has like a full community of people, and they have their own ML models that they use for stuff, right? So like they have their own their own policies for how they deploy them, at their own what the specifics of the model does, and it has like real implications. So like for example, if a community makes a model that maybe does like a quick auto revision, a reversion. So like basically like if you see a bot that comes in and like auto reverts something, that's totally fine for that community, because the community is deciding that they want to have something that like makes an auto edit to revert someone to edit. For us as the Wikimedia Foundation, that is not the structure that we want to do, because it is not our role. Like we don't run English Wikipedia. Like we host the service, we support them, we provide the technology and that kind of stuff, but we are not like sitting there like making edits around things. We're there to sort of help the human editors, be more efficient, or help them have like a better time, or help introduce new editors to the system and that kind of stuff, but not be that one going in there. So none of the models that I know that we host use those internal talk pages. I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, that could totally not be true for other models that the communities build themselves, and even the ones that like sort of we host. Another question, any interest in hearing about, also interested in hearing about any broader research or ML projects that aren't necessarily edit quality? Yeah, so there's actually a really, quite a few interesting ones out there that I'm really excited about. Probably the most exciting sort of set of ones are around a group of projects that are sort of jointly called structured tasks. The idea behind structured tasks is that you can use ML to help a new user to a system. Like imagine a new editor or someone who might be potentially an editor come in and make some kind of change with, like, say on their mobile phone. Like, so for example, I'll give you like a real example. Like say we use ML to identify like what we might think like a word in an article is like a link. Right, so like this word, it's just a regular word in the article. Do we think this is a link or not? And then we could present that to the user, say on their mobile device, and say, hey, we think this is a link to this other article. Is that true or not? And they can just like work on that and contribute just through their phone. So like in that way, like what it ends up doing is it means that it's easier for someone to make small participation, easier for someone to come in and without learning like the whole because like editing Wikipedia can be daunting, right? Like there's a lot of norms around what things are. There's like lots of guides on how to do it. There's like the formatting of the actual articles. Like it can be sort of daunting, and helping to like reduce that by saying like, hey, we think, I don't know, like we think this should be just. I guess I can make it bigger so you can see it. Like we think this thing is a link. This little thing right here is a link. Having that and then presenting it to the user where they could say, oh, cool, it's a link or it's not a link or something like that is a way to get people involved. That's the kind of stuff that I think is really cool and interesting. We also are working on stuff around topics. So we have an existing topic model that sort of predicts the topics of like a draft article or an article and that kind of stuff. And trying to deploy a model that actually makes that better for various reasons, sort of be less strict around like what particular categories are and that kind of stuff, and allow things to be in multiple categories, but really allow people to sort of browse Wikipedia a little bit more in an organized way. But really like the one that gets me is like the structured task. I think is super cool. I think the idea of using ML in a way where you're not coming in and making huge changes to the site, right? Because that's not our goal as like with human in the loop, but instead are using it to sort of help create a user experience for a new editor or someone who's just starting editing or someone who's just interested in like helping out, to allow them to participate in a way where they don't need to, dig deep down in order to make a small change. Another question. Do you think invisible tags for ML training as something Wikimedia should own, or a third-party solution, or co-opting some feature of articles like categories? I don't know exactly what you. I think like I would say, when it comes to training stuff, I don't know. It depends. Probably the answer to that is like it depends. That's probably the best answer I could do on that. I think I don't really. I worry about like third party solutions for this. So like one of the really interesting things about Wikimedia is that almost everything we use is open source. Like literally, it has been a discussion point that I've seen that like some of us use MacBooks. I use a MacBook, like I guess it's not a company, it's an organization lab MacBook. A lot of people use Linux machines, and one of the reasons that people have said that like the reason they use Linux machines is like we should support open source technology, we should support open source libraries. That's one of the big reasons that like we don't use NVIDIA for ML, is because like we want to support open source. That is the goal of the foundation, is to support that kind of stuff. And so when it comes to like third party solutions, like things like open source libraries are a really interesting approach, but like I get a lot of emails from vendors who are like, hey, I have this closed source technology that whatever moderates content, or I have this closed source technology for like labeling images and that kind of stuff. And we will I'm going to say almost there just in case it ever happens, but like basically almost never use that. We're always going to use open source stuff because the goal of how we work and a core philosophical belief of the team and the organization and the foundation as a whole is that like you can see what we do. There is no black box around stuff. You should be able to see our infrastructure. You should be able to see where your donations are going. You should be able to see me make a model. You should be able to download that model. You should be able to download the training data. Like that should be open as much as possible. There's issues around privacy, and I think that's probably some of the most interesting discussions that happen, because how do you have this balance around, well, we need to gather data because we need to like, say train a model, but how do we gather data in a way that like maximizes privacy? There's actually some really interesting pros. We just had someone from the legal team just did a presentation to the whole tech team on differential privacy, which is the idea of like throwing in random noise into data so that it's harder to, that's a massive simplification of a very deep topic, but like to try to throw basically so you couldn't identify an individual user, but like the aggregate stats are the same. There's some interesting stuff there. I don't know like all the specifics, but like I do think that we would be, whatever it would be like focused on like an open source tooling or our own tooling or something like that, rather than some like some third party service. Which if I worked at like a company, I would just I'd be more fine with. But here, this is our philosophy, and it's pretty awesome to work on it. Do you use Bayesian models? We don't. I would like to, and I have some thoughts in the future about like where we might use that kind of stuff. But for right now, we do not. Let me just go through some of these questions. Are you aware of any edit tags which is similar? I'm looking for techniques for extracting sentences. Samat, you should go to the IRC channel for that. That's a little bit more specific than I think I could do right this one. Another question. What extent do you focus on model optimization as it could have a huge effect on consumption of computing resources and the optimization accuracy trade-off? Yeah, that is a huge deal for us. So the things, like the theme of this is sort of like what I've learned in my year. And like, I will say that the Wikimedia Foundation is like 500 people. It gets like a lot of donations from folks. And for being a top 10 website in the world, like it is run on a shoestring budget. That is like, compared to like another place that you work, like we are coming in with like very minimal resources, like just enough to get what we need done. And so when it comes to, model optimization, we really, really care. And one of the interesting things that we've come into in the past is the idea of this optimization versus accuracy trade-off, which you mentioned. So the general idea is that like you can get more performant models. I wouldn't just say accuracy, but like you can get more performant models, but it takes more compute power to get those models to like, to make a prediction. You could see like a larger random forest or something like that. It is a trade-off that we definitely make, and it is something where, one of the discussions that we've sort of had internally is what does it mean to not only make that performance optimization like trade-off, right? Like fast models versus like very, very, very like high quality models in a setting where we're doing human in the loop stuff. So we only do human in the loop, which means that like between us and an edit or us and a change, there's like a human in there. So like we don't just add links to Wikipedia. We like ask a human like, hey, we think this should be a link. Do you think it should be a link? That kind of stuff. So they're making the final call. What does it mean in the case where you're not actually making the actual change? You're just you're providing like a suggestion to someone and seeing like if they want to make the change. Part of me thinks that maybe we could we could have more optimization. Like we could like lean more towards the optimization side, because if something was less performant, but there was a human in the loop to sort of catch the model's mistakes, it might work. But we'll see, because it's definitely something that we're going to run into more and more as we deploy more and more models, where we have to run into the like, what is the sort of philosophy that we have behind the idea of like, okay, cool, like we can't have a model that's trained on, or a model that takes like a huge compute power to actually make a prediction. I think, frankly, like there's another aspect of this that's interesting, is the transparency versus accessibility kind of thing. So like, or I would say like open source versus accessible, where I want to make models that every single person in this feed or this live stream can actually come in and like download them onto their laptop, change them, like confirm what we're doing, right? Confirm on their own what we're doing, come in and like ask, like offer suggestions to us, like make commits, right? Part of that means that if you actually made a very, very, very complicated high, like just like you really went to town and you were sort of more doing like OpenAI style or Google research style models, that would actually reduce the real world accessibility of those models, because you would need that really intense infrastructure to actually like run them or confirm that what we're doing and that kind of stuff, which means that you would end up essentially having to trust us because you couldn't run the models themselves to confirm it yourself. I really don't want that. Like I want people to come in and be able to run it on their laptop and tweak things and see our original training data and run it locally and come in with suggestions and that kind of stuff. So I definitely am big on the optimization side, like the speed optimization side. What is the most successful, most important ML system currently in use at Wikimedia? Right now, the big one that we've always been using is called ORS. ORS is our infrastructure for deploying and running all the models that we have. Some of the big ones that ORS hosts are ones on edit quality, so predicting like the quality of the edit, predicting whether like an edit is like damaging or not, or productive or not, and around topics. That's also one where like predicting the topic of everything. Those are sort of like the big ones. We do some other ones, and we're going to do those more in the future. But like definitely the ones that get a lot of traffic are around about edit quality, because we're constantly making predictions about edits and about like the topic of the whatever's coming in. But OR's the system that running it. We're in the process now of building what we call Liftwing, which is a new infrastructure based on Kubeflow. So Kubeflow is an open source MLOps library, and it runs on Kubernetes. So we are busy setting that up, and that'll be like eventually a replacement to ORS. If you come into our RSC chat, you can see some of my team's SREs banging their head against the desk as they try to configure this thing. You can watch the nitty-gritty details of their pain while they try to configure Kubeflow on our infrastructure. And that's a big part of it, that it's open. Like it is that you can actually like go into the IRC chat and watch us work and complain about things and not understand something and finally figure it out. You can see Luca's the one who's been doing it recently. You could like literally the chat log is like him figuring something out, hating himself because it's not right, and then thinking he figured it out, and then it's not right, and like slowly working towards that goal. That is the level of transparency that like we want to have around stuff. Is Wikimedia codes? Sorry, I didn't see someone. I think I missed a question here. Sorry. I am learning about taxonomy hierarchical clustering of documents. Is there an easy way to give a name for a cluster created using topic models or any clustering algorithms? There's two ways that we've worked in the past. And some of this isn't work on my team, but it's been work on other teams. And it's been pretty interesting to see. So I've seen two that happened at the foundation. Both of these aren't deployed yet, but one is so our topic model that we actually have deployed right now, like it actually runs predictions for like basically like humans got together and created a set of categories, and then it ends up trying to like predict the category, like make a prediction for each of those categories, and then the one with the highest prediction amount is like the one that chooses. But there's been another model that's made by another team at the foundation that people were experimenting with actually just did that clustering of documents, and the names of them are like so interesting because it kind of makes sense and then it kind of doesn't at the same time. So it'll be like, I don't know, it'll be like Churchill, like I guess Churchill history coffee or something like that, and then you're like, I guess that makes sense, like you can kind of see like like there was some notion there. Or there'll be another one that'll be like soccer, weather, fitness or something like that, and you're like, okay, like there's like some kind of notion there, and then some of them seem to like make no sense at all, and so I think my argument in this one that I've always made is like it depends on what your use case of it is, because if it's sort of a recommendation behind the scenes, then it's less important that you actually see like a name for the particular cluster that is really important, because what you really care about is like serving someone something that makes sense, and you don't need to show them like this cluster is named X. But when you're trying to be transparent and you're trying to make categories, right, like up here, like this kind of stuff, then it becomes a big deal because it has to make sense, right? Like it has to be like obviously it makes sense. And that kind of say, so you would need a different type of model. Is Wikimedia open source, especially pipelines and ML ops? Yes, everything we do is open source. Every little thing that we do. Um, the only parts of the system that my team has worked on and will work on that aren't open source are when there are privacy concerns. So I haven't done anything with fundraising, but if we did something with fundraising, like you wouldn't be able to see it because it involves people's like personal data. Or there's some kind of security reason behind it or something like that. But everything we do is open source, like if at all humanly possible, which is like, the truth is it's like 99.99999% is open source. All the MLOps stuff, everything like that is all available. Da, 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 da. Why is the decision to maintain on-prem rather than AWS, especially with large language models? Yeah, so the big reason is that as a foundation, like, we believe in open knowledge, we believe in free knowledge, we want to support things that use free and open source software, and for us, it's a philosophical thing. I use that a lot in this talk, about deploying on open source technologies, so like using open source technologies for stuff, and that means that we end up owning a lot of the infrastructure. There's also, frankly, like a cost part of it. It turns out that for certain things you can vastly reduce your cost by hosting stuff on-prem, which is interesting. I don't remember the numbers, but someone told me the numbers of like how much it costs to host all the images on all Wikipedias, and I remember thinking that is like a very small AWS bill compared to like what I would guesstimate what AWS would cost for it, which is cool. Which like I super appreciate. It you definitely run into stuff. So for example, like it means that when you want to say launch a new project or something like that, you have to go farther down the stack to start, right? Because I can't. What AWS is doing is allowing you to start on like the software part of it while skipping the sort of like server part of it. We have to start at the server part of it. So it's like we want to do a project. Literally the first thing we do is like we're speccing out servers. Okay, well, do you want a GPU in the server? Great. I ordered a GPU for one of our servers and it didn't fit. It physically didn't fit in the server. So then, we had to send it back and now we're looking for another one and that kind of stuff. But like that's the level you need to start and march through. I will say like one of the nice things is that it allows, not using AWS and stuff like that allows the foundation to follow its mission like much more to the letter, where we can make way more stuff open source. We can host things exactly the way we want because it's our infrastructure. So for example, we are eventually moving to GitLabs as our like issue ticketing system and that kind of stuff. And that's going to host on our own servers. Like it is open source, GitLab's open source software hosted on our servers, which we own, which we control, which are ours, which means that, say for instance, someone asks for like a government sends a letter to us saying that like we need to remove something or not, like it is not, it's up to us to sort of decide, and our amazing legal team to sort of decide what we do there, like with the community, rather than it's up to Amazon because they, at the end of the day, like they have all the servers. So it's been cool to do. It's definitely like a different approach than one that I've used in the past, but it's pretty sweet. Is there some library model which you use for drift detection, especially when you host lots of models? No, but honestly, I have thought about doing one of these exact live streams and looking at exactly that. So I know that there is model drift. So for folks, model drift happens where you train a model in the past, and over time, just naturally, the model becomes less and less performant, like less and less accurate, less and less, et cetera, et cetera. That's called model drift. I have really thought about how to do that, particularly in the idea of Kubeflow. So like, is there a way that I could do model drift detection in Kubeflow just naturally within the workflow? So you could detect it if it happens too much, that someone who comes in and trains a model could actually see the existing model drift and could care if they're supposed to worry about it or not. I have definitely thought about what library to use, and I'd love to explore it more, like literally in a setting like this where we just look through some of them and try them out and see what they do. I think that would be really, really, really interesting. Do you build your own infrastructure per projects? If you want to train a particular model, you go buy that GPU first, or do you have a common compute pool? So we have, it is per project. It doesn't go down to like a particular model, but it does go down to like a particular infrastructure. So I will show you a good example of this. Or is Grafana? So, oh, and I should be posting these links in chat. I'm sorry. Let me drag this one over. So there's this, and I will post it into the chat. So this is the infrastructure. So this is the analytics for the infrastructure that runs ORS. And I talked about ORS before, is that's our existing infrastructure for hosting models. So this is literally, and this I'll be able to explain literally every single part to this in a simple way. So we have 2 data centers, like physical buildings. One is in Virginia in the US, we call it Echiad, and one is in Texas, it's called COD-FW. In Echiad, like in the physical building in Virginia, there are these servers, or 001, or 002, or 003, like physical server blades slid into the machine. So here's all the ones that we have in Echiad. It goes all the way to 9. Here's all the ones that we have in Texas, going all the way, so 2008. So 8 in one data center, 8 in another data center. This system combined hosts 110 models, or maybe slightly above that now. And you can see us like tracking all the memory usage of it, all the different workers of it. Here's the different, like where the different predictions are coming from, and that kind of stuff. I would like to point out that too, like this is all totally open. Like you can click that link and go see all of our analytics for everything, which is, like I sort of love the transparency behind it. But for when we went to replace this infrastructure with a new infrastructure, we bought 8 different machines, 8 more machines, put them next to these machines, and are building it on those. So like each project that we do requires like its own sort of resource. I think ideally, like there's been ideas of moving to like more of a common compute infrastructure, but for right now, like this is what we sort of work on. And we just went through the annual planning process, and a big part of that was like, how many servers do you want and where do you want them? And so, working through that kind of stuff. I will say it's a nice thing for like from an ownership perspective, because you have you have something that are your resources and you can do what you want. I think the general SREs on the SRE team who are in charge of like making sure all of this doesn't go down, probably have graying hair. This would probably be follow up on the cloud provider question. I assumed you partially used cloud providers for training, but is that not true? Do you train large models on your hardware? Quite impressive from an SRE. Yes. So we train all of our models on our own infrastructure. We have our own set of machines separate from all these machines. These are the machines for like serving the models. We have separate sets of machines that we use to train the models on. And what we're going to replace this ORS infrastructure with one called Liftwing, which we're building, which will like sort of replace the functionality of serving models. Once we are done with Liftwing, we're going to move on to what we call TradeWing, which will be a Kubernetes cluster for training models. So we do all the training ourselves in our own systems. We don't use AWS for like there is very, very small times that we use AWS. So for example, on my team, the SREs on my team are building Liftwing, but we also have machine learning engineers who are like working on models to make sure that those models will be able to move over and work on Kubeflow. We actually have a small instance on Kubeflow on AWS where like they train the models like on our infrastructure, and then they go check and make sure they work on that AWS infrastructure, and then that means that we're confident that we can move them over to our infrastructure. Once our infrastructure's up, we'll close down that AWS and we won't use it anymore. But like just those like little teeny uses here and there have come up, but like really we focus on our infrastructure a lot, and spend a lot of time on it. Under which license will you make your models available for download? Yeah, it's MIT is mostly ones. So at the foundation, like, we don't really hold a lot of intellectual property around this kind of stuff. Like, I want you to download it. I want you to download it. I want you to use it. I want you to improve it. I want you to do like what you want to do with it. That's the goal. Like, our goal is to be as accessible and transparent as possible to people, in the most extreme way that we possibly can. And a big part of that is making it as of it. Like we believe that the models that we make should be, they're serving our particular use case, but if you find a use for them, or you find an interesting technique from them, or you want to build something on top of them, like go ahead. Like, that's totally, like, that's our goal. That would mean that we had provided something of use to people, who are also sharing free knowledge, would be like great. And that'd be a total win in our book. We are not trying to hold, like, what I'm actively trying to not do is to build a big black box system that produces big black box models, right? Like, we have this infrastructure that you don't get to see, and a priority list of what we're working on that you don't get to see, which produces models that you don't get to see and could never run on your own. Like, that is the opposite of what I'm going for. We're going for just broad transparency in what we do, and really, like, go to the extent of, like, what we call community governance or community model governance, which would be the idea is that, the models that we host actually have, say we train a model for Swahili Wikipedia. Like, we're trying to establish the procedures in place for that community to actually be able to say whether they want that model or not, right? It is totally valid for them to say, hey, someone created this model for Swahili Wikipedia article quality. We don't want that as a community of people who is the Swahili, Wikimedia, like, maintainers and admins and stuff like that. We don't want that kind of stuff. That isn't for us. And then we'll turn it off, right? Like, it's about making sure that the community has the ability to control that kind of stuff. What infrastructure tooling has been the most helpful to you all? Anything surprisingly helpful or unhelpful? I am going to leave that to the SREs, who I don't think are actually in this chat at this moment. But it's I don't know. Maybe Andy, who's A-Craze in the chat, maybe has something. But for me, I have actually really been enjoying. I've been enjoying. What was the one? I don't know. I'm gonna leave that to the SREs because I'm gonna say something and they're gonna be like, Chris, no one likes that thing. I hate that thing. So I can't answer that. What projects? Andy, who works on my team, KF serving, has been really great. So KF serving is the part, like the part of Kubeflow. So Kubernetes, on top of Kubernetes is Kubeflow, which is an open source library for maintaining, for like training and deploying models. That deploying model part is called KF serving. And that's like the first, like Liftwing is mostly just KF serving because that's what we're trying to, all we're doing on Liftwing is just deploying models from it. What projects, if any, are you looking for data scientists, ML contributors? Would love to spend some time in a way that is more meaningful than just donating every year. Well, one, thank you for your donation because all the stuff that you look at is created by those donations. For us, like, there is a lot of areas around like our article quality models, and that kind of stuff. yeah, just literally paying my salary, quite literally paying my salary. There's I will say that like where we've gone in the past with like our article quality models and our draft quality models and all of our models is that like we'll make them sort of internally or with like do a lot of the work ourselves. And I'm really trying to make sure that those models are put out in a way that other people can work on. So for instance, when we have like article quality models and that kind of stuff, like you should be able to go and see them and download them and like experiment with them and tell us this are wrong. So like literally what the Google Summer of Code Fellow is doing is taking the existing training data, which is public for how we created these models, and seeing that if he can do better, like if he can use modern NLP techniques to like create a more performant model using that training data, because that means like us creating new training data is too much of a lift at this exact moment of time, but we can actually have them. This is the opposite of what you should do in some dream worlds. In some dream world, you should care about really, really nice data and then have a simple model. But I think there's probably a decent lift that we could do here by having taking modern techniques to the existing data set and try to like gain a little bit more performance there. That would definitely be the place to go for us for sure. my sort of hope is that like we're definitely working on models, but we're also really focused on the infrastructure part because like we want to make sure that we can deploy the models, and that people in this chat can come in and sort of see what we're working on and take it themselves and sort of push it farther and say, hey, like, I made this change. It actually uses a better, it's more performant or something like that. So everywhere, I guess, like anywhere we have some kind of models, like I definitely think article quality and draft quality and edit quality are like some really interesting places for that. Somehow I still cannot wrap my head around using Kubeflow and KF serving. Is the documentation bad, or am I missing something? Can you point me to some resources working with Kubeflow? Yeah, so I will say the documentation, because Kubeflow is, so I'll take a step back. We had a need for a modern ML ops infrastructure at the foundation, and as someone who's had a director role for various places for a long time, I'm very, very, very hesitant to take on non-mature technologies, because mature technologies have tons of documentation, tons of consultants you could talk to, tons of resources and that kind of stuff. And like a lot of the bugs are worked out and it's just easier to use and it's more dependable. But in the case of ML ops, there like isn't a lot of that, particularly open source stuff. And so, we looked at a few like MLflow and that kind of stuff. We went with Kubeflow, which is the one, and I don't regret that decision at all because I think it's super awesome. But I will admit the documentation is weak. I will the number of like consultants that I could like hire to like give us advice and something like that is a smaller pool of people. I think I do think there's like some good books coming out about using Kubeflow and learning Kubeflow. I think is really interesting. Probably like I would say the mix for me was reading some of the books that came out around Kubeflow, and then also the talks. Like sort of in tech, I think conference talks are like the best documentation for more cutting edge, bleeding edge, newer stuff. Just because for some reason people do talks before they write a book, and so like having seeing the talk and stuff. But it's definitely something that we have sort of. It is a hassle that we're dealing with that we want to do it. And actually one of the first things someone on my team did was make a commit to the Kubeflow repo, improving some documentation. I think that was like the first thing that was our first open source contribution to that. Let me take one more because we're now running out of time. When is a technology mature, or is there an inflection point or a sliding scale? I don't know how to precisely sort of find that inflection point. There's definitely, so for example, like there's definitely technologies and even techniques that are way more well known, and there's like a ton of books around them. So like there's definitely areas where it's like really, really, that's a really interesting question. I wonder if there's like, when you have like 3 books on something, there's probably some point where like most of the issues have been worked out from it. And because you don't just want, that's a really interesting approach. I don't know. Okay, this is what I'll say. This is my total guess off the cuff. If there is a significant piece of work out there, like a book or a podcast or something about a particular use case of that particular technology, then I would probably call it mature. Like for example, like Python for astronomy was probably like a sign that like Python is mature, because someone has a whole book around like what is mature enough for Wikipedia. That depends on the team. I mean, other teams like are more conservative, and other teams are for, at least at Wikimedia, like some teams are more conservative than our team, and some teams are way more risky than our team. It just depends on like the domain space and kind of where you feel like you want to take those risks. For us, I felt like we were pretty safe on a lot of different areas, and so we could take a big risk on this one. And it definitely is working out. I think if we had a lot of existing products that were risky in themselves, then I'd be less willing to take the risk. Because you don't want too much risk in what your team is working on. Right now we have one risky thing that we're doing, which is this Kubeflow KF survey thing, which is working out, but like, we had to buy all the servers and that kind of stuff before we were, before we were absolutely positively certain that like this is exactly going to work out exactly how we think. It was more like, okay, cool, we meet all the requirements. Like this is all the memory requirements we need. Here's the hardware we need. Okay, cool. Now let's put in, now let's set up the system and moving up from there. So it's working out, but I wouldn't want to take on too much more risk. Well, it's time. We are 2 minutes over. So that is it. Thank you all. My only real ask is that, like, if you can, like, jump into our, I would love to just, like, jump into our discussion page on our team page, which I'll post right here. And just sort of, like, give me some kind of comment on, like, how we're doing with these things. I've gotten pretty little feedback on, like, this exact format of this live stream, although a lot of people attend each week. And so, I would benefit from sort of hearing the good and bad of how I'm doing things. Like the first week, no one could hear sound out of one of their earpieces if you're wearing headphones, which I didn't know about. So typically I'm getting better. I'd love to hear that feedback if you have it. And that is it. Oh, wait, one last question. What is the one habit you have which helped you compound your learning? I think repetition is probably the one. Just a lot of repetition. I don't understand things the first time I read them. I understand it like by doing it a bunch. That's typically mine. Cool. Awesome. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all if you've donated, I guess. All right. Have a good day.